My name is Edith Carter, and I am 77 years old. I never asked for much from life, not at this stage. I didn't expect a grand celebration, red carpets, or extravagant gestures. All I wanted was something simple: a seat at my son's table, the warmth of family around me, a reminder that after all the years of giving, I still belonged. That evening, I slipped into my navy blue dress, the one I reserved for special occasions. It wasn't fancy, but it was respectable. It was the kind of dress I thought my daughter-in-law Marissa wouldn't roll her eyes at. I checked the clock just past 6. Dinner was at 7. I smiled at the thought of walking into their home, hearing the laughter, maybe holding my grandson Toby's hand as he told me about his job. And then my phone buzzed. I reached for my glasses, expecting a last-minute question about dessert. Instead, I read 8 words that split my heart in two. "You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there." It was Garrett's number, my son, my only child. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe his phone had been hacked. But the truth settled in quickly. It was him, his tone, his decision. I sat down slowly, the phone heavy in my hand, my heart not just breaking but unraveling. Memories surged: Garrett clinging to my hand on his first day of school, Garrett crying when his dog passed away, Garrett introducing Marissa with joy in his eyes. And now Garrett, a grown man, telling me I was unwelcome. For a long moment, I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just sat in the silence and felt something shift inside me. After all the years, after all the giving, maybe it was time to stop showing up for people who made it clear they didn't want me there. The house was too quiet. I walked to my old secretary desk, the one my mother left me, and opened the drawer where I kept my financial documents. Inside was a lifetime of sacrifice written in ink and numbers. I pulled out the thickest folder labeled Garrett. There they were, every gift, every bailout, every sacrifice I had made to cushion his life. A $20,000 check to launch his business. Tuition for Marissa when she wanted to earn her real estate license. Transfers for roof repairs. A down payment for the townhouse by the river. $120,000, my gift to them, a mother's way of saying I'm here. I care. And yet here I was uninvited. For the first time, I didn't make excuses for him. I didn't soften the edges of truth. I sat in the reality that my love had become invisible, reduced to transactions, and taken for granted. That night, I didn't sleep. The text replayed in my mind over and over. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I brewed a strong cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and called the bank. "My name is Edith Carter," I said firmly. "I need to suspend all automatic payments immediately, and I want to revoke the power of attorney granted to my son." The silence on the line was long, but it wasn't awkward. It was powerful. In that moment, I felt the weight of decades begin to lift. When the woman confirmed that all 174 payments were blocked, I whispered to myself words my late husband James had once told me: "Love them, but don't let them walk on you." I hung up, exhaled, and realized I hadn't felt this light in years. Not long after, Garrett came pounding on my door. He didn't knock gently. He rang the bell with impatience, the way someone does when they expect control. "Mom, what's going on?" he demanded, walking in without waiting for permission. The mortgage bounced. Marissa's car payment didn't go through. The bank called me. "Did you cancel everything?" "Yes," I answered simply. He blinked, stunned. "All of it. All of it." He collapsed into a chair, looking like the air had been knocked from his chest. "Why?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Because you uninvited me from your house, the one I helped pay for. You told me your wife didn't want me there, and you didn't stop her." His excuses tumbled out. "That was a mistake. Marissa was upset. I didn't mean it." I cut him off quietly. "You didn't mean to say it, or you didn't mean for there to be consequences." His silence gave me the answer. I poured him tea, though he didn't touch it. "Tell me one thing you've done for me, Garrett. Not because you had to. Not because you wanted something, just because you wanted to." He stared at the floor. He had no answer. And in that silence, I found my own. After Garrett stormed out that morning, the silence in my house was deafening. I stood at the window, watching him drive away, his anger almost visible in the way his tires screeched against the pavement. For so long, I would have rushed after him, called to him, begged him to sit down and talk. But I didn't move. Not this time. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around my tea, letting the warmth seep into me. I wasn't trembling, I wasn't crying. For the first time in years, I felt steady. The phone rang later that afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but when I saw Toby's name on the screen, my heart ached. My grandson, sweet, thoughtful Toby. Grandma, his voice was hesitant. Dad told me you canceled everything. Is that true? Yes, Toby, I said gently. It's true. There was a pause. I could hear the uncertainty in his breathing, but why? I closed my eyes, searching for words that wouldn't sound like poison dripping into his ears. I didn't want to pit him against his parents. I didn't want to make him choose. But I also couldn't lie. Because, sweetheart, I realized that love isn't about how much money you give. And I've been giving and giving while being treated like I don't belong. That has to stop. For a long time, there was only silence. Then Toby whispered, I still want you here, Grandma, even if they don't. The tears finally came hot and unrelenting. Thank you, Toby. That means more than you know. That night, I sat in bed thinking about him. About the way children can see truth more clearly than adults weighed down by pride and resentment. I promised myself that no matter what happened, I wouldn't let Marissa's disdain or Garrett's weakness take Toby away from me. But I also knew I couldn't keep enabling them. Love without respect isn't love, it's servitude. And I had served long enough. The next Sunday, I went to church for the first time in months. Not because I was searching for God in the pews, but because I needed the quiet. The stained glass windows cast colors across my lap as I sat alone reflecting on the choices that had brought me here. James and I had worked so hard, saved every penny, built a life that wasn't luxurious but steady. When he died, I poured everything into Garrett. I thought I was honoring James's memory by supporting our son, but now I wondered if James would be disappointed. Not in Garrett, but in me. Disappointed that I had allowed myself to be treated like a checkbook instead of a mother. Disappointed that I had confused sacrifice with silence. After service, a woman from the congregation approached me. Her name was Lillian, a widow like me with grown children of her own. She clasped my hand and said, You look lighter, Edith, as if a burden has been lifted. I smiled faintly. Maybe it has. We talked for a while, and I realized how much I had isolated myself over the years, always putting Garrett and his family first. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen for who I was, not just for what I could give. That week, I joined Lillian for lunch, then another friend for a walk in the park. Slowly, I began filling my days with things that had nothing to do with Garrett or Marissa. It felt like learning to breathe again after years of shallow breaths. But Garrett didn't stay silent for long. He came back one evening, his tone less angry, more desperate. Mom, you can't just cut us off like this. We have bills, Toby's tuition, the mortgage, we need your help. I looked him in the eyes and said calmly, I helped you build a life. It's time you learn to stand in it without me holding you up. His jaw tightened. Marissa says you're being selfish, that you're punishing us. I almost laughed. Selfish. The word echoed bitterly. After decades of giving, they called me selfish for finally choosing myself. No, Garrett, I said softly. Selfishness is expecting someone to sacrifice endlessly without gratitude. Selfishness is uninviting your mother from dinner in the house she helped pay for. I am not being selfish. I am setting boundaries. He had no reply. He left again, but I noticed something different in his eyes. Fear. Not of losing money, but of losing control. Days passed, and then came the letter. Not from Garrett, but from Marissa. A sharp, cold note slipped into my mailbox, dripping with venom. Edith, your interference is tearing this family apart. If you cared about Garrett and Toby, you would keep supporting us. If you refuse, don't expect to see us again. I sat with that letter for a long time, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the finality of it. Marissa had made her position clear. To her, I was not family. I was a resource, a means to an end. I burned the letter in the fireplace, watched the flames devour the words, reducing them to ash. And as the last ember died, I whispered, I will not be erased. Not long after Toby came to see me on his own. He looked older than his 16 years, weighed down by the tension in his household. They fight about you all the time, he admitted, sitting on my couch. Mom says you're selfish. Dad says you've changed. But I don't care what they say. You're still my grandma. I pulled him close, my heart breaking and healing all at once. And you'll always have me, Toby, no matter what. That night after he left, I realized the battle wasn't really between me and Garrett, or even me and Marissa. The battle was between the woman I had been quiet, compliant, endlessly giving, and the woman I was becoming. A woman who finally understood that her worth wasn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. The days rolled on, and though I filled them with small joys, walks with Lillian, afternoons in the garden, knitting by the window, there was still an undercurrent of tension that refused to leave. I knew Garrett and Marissa were plotting their next move. You don't strip entitled people of the power they've enjoyed for years without them trying to claw it back. It came sooner than I expected. A week before Thanksgiving, Garrett called me. His voice was oddly bright, almost rehearsed. "Mom, why don't you come to dinner? Toby misses you. Let's try to move past everything." I wanted to believe him. For a moment, my heart leapt at the thought of sitting at a table again, hearing Toby laugh, pretending for just one night that everything was normal. But something in his tone unsettled me. It wasn't warmth, it was strategy. Still, I agreed. Not because I trusted him, but because I was tired of shadows. If there was going to be a reckoning, I wanted it in the light. When I arrived that evening, Marissa greeted me at the door with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "Edith," she said sweetly, "how nice of you to join us." The dining room was immaculate, candles lit, silver-polished food laid out like a magazine spread. But beneath the shine, the air was heavy. Garrett sat stiffly at the head of the table. Toby gave me a weak smile from his seat, his eyes darting nervously between his parents. Dinner began with small talk, but it didn't last. Halfway through the meal, Marissa set down her fork with deliberate force. "Edith," she began, her tone sugar-laced but venomous. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." I dabbed my mouth with my napkin and met her eyes. "By all means." She leaned forward, her smile tightening. "You've made things very difficult for us. Cutting off the support you've always provided, it's selfish and frankly, it's tearing this family apart. Garrett and I are drowning in bills and you sit in that paid-off house of yours acting like a victim." Garrett shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. His silence was as loud as her accusations. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Marissa, I have supported you both for years. I gave without asking for anything in return, not even respect. But when my own son tells me I am not welcome in his home, I have to draw a line. Love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. It means mutual respect, and I have not been given that." Her eyes narrowed. "So this is about a text message. You're willing to destroy your relationship with your son and grandson over hurt feelings." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "This is not about a text, Marissa. This is about years of being treated as a wallet instead of a person. It's about the moment I realized my love had been taken for granted." For the first time, Toby spoke up. His voice cracked with emotion. "Mom, Dad, she's right. You've treated Grandma like she's just money. That's not fair." The room went silent. Garrett's face flushed crimson. "Toby, don't talk to us like that." But Toby stood firm, his hands trembling on the edge of the table. "I won't sit here and watch you do this to her anymore." Pride swelled in my chest even as my heart ached for the boy caught in the crossfire. Marissa's composure snapped. Her voice rose sharp and cutting. "If you think you can turn my own son against me, Edith, you're mistaken. You may have money, but you don't have a place here. Not anymore." Her words hit the air like a slap. Garrett kept his head down, staring at his plate cowardly as ever. I stood slowly, laying my napkin on the table. "You're right about one thing, Marissa. I don't have a place here, because you've made sure of it. But let me be clear, I will not beg, I will not grovel, and I will not allow myself to be erased. If you cannot accept me as family, then I will create my own sense of family elsewhere." Marissa scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to stand tall to speak with such calm conviction. I looked at Garrett, my voice breaking slightly. "Son, I hope one day you remember who held your hand when you were small, who stayed up all night when you were sick, who gave you everything she had so you could have more. I hope one day you realize what you've lost." Toby's eyes filled with tears. He rushed to my side, hugging me tightly. "I'll always remember, Grandma," he whispered. I kissed his forehead and left the house without looking back. The night air was cold, but I felt strangely warm inside. For the first time, I hadn't folded under Marissa's sharp tongue or Garrett's silence. I had spoken my truth and I had walked away with my dignity intact. When I got home, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the fireplace. The flames crackled softly, casting light on the photographs lining my mantel. James holding baby Garrett in his graduation gown, Toby's first birthday. For so long, I had let those memories chain me to a cycle of sacrifice. But tonight, those same memories gave me strength. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is built on love, respect, and reciprocity. If those are missing, then all you have is obligation, and obligation without love is nothing more than bondage. As the fire burned low, I whispered to James's photograph, I finally did it. I finally stood up. And in that quiet moment, I felt as though he was there beside me, proud. The fallout from that dinner came faster than even I anticipated. Within a week, Garrett was at my door again, this time not with anger, but with desperation painted across his face. He looked older than his 39 years, lines of worry carved deep into his forehead. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking, "we're in trouble. The bank called. The mortgage is behind. Marissa's car is up for repossession, and Toby's school. They're saying tuition hasn't been paid." I listened quietly, offering him no interruption, no comforting words. He wrung his hands like a boy caught in a lie. "Can you help us?" Just this once more, his voice broke on the word help. I took a slow sip of tea before replying. "Garrett, I told you at that table. My help has always been mistaken for obligation. I won't do it again. You and Marissa have lived as though money falls from the sky. But it didn't. It came from my sweat, my sacrifices, my years of careful saving. You will learn to live within your means, or you will lose the life you've built." He looked stunned, as though the mother he knew, the one who always swooped in with her checkbook, had vanished. Perhaps she had. "But what about Toby?" he asked, his eyes pleading now. "He'll suffer for this." That cut deep. The thought of Toby bearing the consequences of his parents' arrogance made my chest ache. But I had prepared for this moment. "I set aside a trust for Toby years ago," I said firmly. "One Marissa doesn't know about. He will not go without. But I will not funnel another dime into your household for Marissa to waste." Garrett flinched, as though I had struck him. And in a way, I suppose I had. The strike of truth is always sharper than any blade. He left that day defeated, and though I wanted to run after him, to hold him, to remind him he was still my son, I stayed rooted in my chair. Because loving someone sometimes means letting them fall. Weeks passed. The gossip in town began to ripple through the grapevine. Marissa's shiny SUV was gone from their driveway. The for sale sign appeared in front of their home, the same home my money had secured. And soon whispers spread of arguments that shook the walls so loudly neighbors called the police. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Quiet revenge does not revel in suffering. It simply allows truth to do its work. But then one evening there was a knock at my door. It was Toby. He stood there with a backpack slung over his shoulder, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Grandma," he said softly, "can I stay here for a while?" I pulled him into my arms, my heart breaking and mending all at once. "Of course, sweetheart, this is your home too." Over hot cocoa at the kitchen table, Toby poured out his heart. "Mom blames you for everything. She says you ruined us. But I heard her yelling at Dad. She's the one who spent all the money. She gambled on some house-flipping scheme, and now everything's gone. Dad just let her do it." I stroked his hair gently. "It's not your fault, Toby. None of this is on you. And as long as I'm here, you'll never be without a roof or food or love." His eyes filled with tears. "I wish Dad would stand up to her like you did." That night, as Toby slept soundly in the guest room, I sat by the fire and reflected. I realized then that my revenge had never truly been against Garrett or Marissa. It was against the version of myself that allowed decades of silence, that let love become currency. By cutting them off, I had finally reclaimed my voice. But the story wasn't finished. One Sunday after church, Marissa confronted me in the parking lot. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she marched toward me, her eyes ablaze. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. "You've turned Garrett against me. You've poisoned Toby with your pity, and you've humiliated us in front of everyone. But you're nothing, Edith. You're just a lonely old woman clinging to money because no one really wants you." The cruelty of her words would once have gutted me. But now I saw them for what they were. The flailing of a drowning woman. I stood tall, my voice calm. "No, Marissa. I'm a woman who finally realized her worth, and that's something you'll never take from me again." She sneered, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off. I watched her go, pity rising where anger used to live, because pity is all that's left for people who thrive on destruction. The following week, Garrett came to see me again. He looked thinner, worn down, his eyes hollow. He sat at my table staring at his hands for a long time before speaking. "Mom," he said finally, "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I let it get this far." I reached across the table, covering his trembling hands with mine. "You're still my son, but you need to decide who you want to be from here on out. Do you want to be the man who hides behind his wife's cruelty, or the man who stands up for what's right?" Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't answer, but for the first time I saw the boy I had raised flicker back to life. That night, as Toby helped me set the table for dinner, he asked Grandma, "Do you ever regret cutting them off?" I paused, laying down the silverware. "Sometimes, sweetheart. It hurts to see your father struggle. But regret is not the same as weakness. I regret that things had to be this way, but I don't regret standing up for myself, because if I hadn't, I'd still be invisible." And as I looked across the table at Toby, at his resilience, his loyalty, his quiet courage, I knew that the story wasn't ending in despair. It was leading to something greater. The months that followed became a quiet revolution in my life. With Toby living under my roof more often than not, my house, once so silent, was filled again with laughter, with the sound of clattering dishes, with the warmth I thought I'd lost forever when Richard passed. But beneath that joy lay an ache, the ache of a mother who still loved her son despite his betrayal, and who still longed for a family whole and unbroken. Some nights when the house was still and Toby slept soundly, I sat by the fire and let the tears come. Grief and love, anger and forgiveness, they mingled inside me, refusing to be neatly separated. It was one such night when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Garrett. "Can I come over tomorrow alone?" My hands trembled as I typed back, "Yes." The next morning he arrived looking as though he had aged 10 years. His once proud posture sagged, his hair flecked with gray that hadn't been there before. He sat across from me at the same table where so many battles had been fought and lost. "I've filed for separation," he said quietly. His voice cracked, but there was a steadiness underneath it I hadn't heard in years. "Marissa's gone. She emptied what little we had left into her account and left me with the debts. But I think it's for the best." I reached across the table, my hand covering his. For the first time in so long, he didn't flinch away. "Garrett," I whispered, "you are not beyond redemption. You are still my son. But you need to understand you broke something in me when you turned me away that night. Trust will take time to rebuild." Tears streamed down his face and he nodded. "I know, Mom. I want Toby to see me as someone worth respecting again. I want him to be proud of me." That was the moment I knew my quiet revenge had done its deepest work. By refusing to shield him, by letting him fall, Garrett had been forced to face himself. And in facing himself, he found the possibility of becoming the man he was meant to be. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I began to see small changes. Garrett found work at a local construction company, hard labor, but honest. He picked Toby up for weekends, cooking him meals in their small apartment, trying to mend what had been shattered. It wasn't perfect, but it was something real. Marissa, on the other hand, faded from our lives like a storm that had burned itself out. Rumors placed her in another city, chasing another wealthy man, leaving behind the wreckage she'd created. I pitied her, but I did not miss her. As spring came to Hazelbrook, I spent afternoons in the garden with Toby, teaching him how to plant tomatoes, how to coax roses into bloom. He had his father's smile, my son's eyes, and a heart that carried scars already too deep for his age. But those scars would one day make him wise, compassionate, strong. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Toby turned to me. "Grandma?" he asked softly. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Happiness felt like too simple a word for the complexity of what I carried. But then I looked at him, the boy who had chosen me, who had seen through the lies, who had stood by me when even my own son faltered, and I realized the truth. "Yes," I said with a smile. "I'm happy. Because I'm free. Free from silence. Free from being used. free to live the rest of my days with dignity. That night after Toby went to bed, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter not to Marissa, not even to Garrett, but to myself. Dear Edith, you spent years believing your worth was measured by what you gave. But you are not a purse to be emptied. You are not a servant in your own story. You are a woman who endured betrayal and found strength in the wreckage. You are allowed to stand tall. You are allowed to say no. And you are allowed to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. I folded that letter and tucked it into my Bible where I knew it would remain long after I was gone. A reminder that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard. The final act of this chapter came on a Sunday afternoon when Garrett and Toby sat at my table again, eating roast chicken just as we had when he was a boy. Garrett lifted his glass and said softly, "To Mom for teaching me the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn, that love without respect is no love at all." Toby clinked his glass of milk against ours, his eyes shining. And in that simple moment, surrounded by broken pieces we had begun to glue back together, I felt peace. My story may not have the fairy tale ending some might expect, but it has something far more valuable: truth. The truth that revenge doesn't always come with fireworks or destruction. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to be diminished, refusing to be used, and choosing instead to stand in quiet, unshakable dignity. So if you're watching this and you've been told your voice doesn't matter, let my story be proof it does. You don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful sound is the silence of someone who finally says enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it made you reflect on your own life, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And please leave a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your truths, because every voice deserves to be part of the conversation.